Hi, this is Mike Panyan. Every Sunday, we have open practice called Sunday for Swords. We meet early, relatively early for Sunday, at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we practice for a couple of hours. And the purpose of the practice is uh, for each person to do their own thing, to kind of go deeply or to work on things that they need to work on. Uh, and I want to talk today about how practice is a process rather than something that's relatively stable. It's more dynamic, a dynamic process. Uh, so I get up in the morning and I head on down there, and I'm usually the first one there. Uh, Start to warm up, and lately what I've been focusing on is the passing step. I've always thought of the passing step as a bit of a charge. You're going from more or less the longest range that you can actually fight at, uh, and you're going in. And all of the sages say that when you go in, you should lead with a sword. If you're going to attack, you should threaten the guy as you go in. Otherwise, if they're astute, they're going to hit you. So doing that successfully is easier said than done. And you can learn a bit about going in from sparring, but the things that you learn from sparring, you have to hone them. And the way that you hone them is through focused practice, what we call basics. It's taking the single movement or a concept and and focusing on that, going deep, looking at details, and each time not losing the essence of a real attack. So you can do a lot of repetitive practice, and it's almost meaningless if you don't have a sense of deadly intent behind what you're doing, and unless you're actually each time striving to have a deep feeling of connection to your imaginary opponent. So that's what I do for my own practice a lot of times. Is I focus on uh, some technique that I'm interested in, and maybe for a while I'll look at a specific biomechanical aspect of it. But when I'm really getting into it, what I tend to do is imagine an opponent and imagine that I have one shot to get them, and I imagine that they know that I'm coming with what I'm coming with. So there's no surprising them. There's no trick. Uh, there's just me looking them right in the eye, and either I'm going to get them or I'm not. So each time I try to do that, and if I do a practice like that with any numbers, it's quite demanding, and I have found that it reaps a lot of rewards. So uh, in the process of doing this kind of repetitive practice, uh, it's also an opportunity to look at some of the biomechanics. And that's what this video is about. In the process of trying to hone our attacks, we're going to look at what we do uh, with a critical eye. You can't get yourself better unless you are willing to look at the things that you're doing wrong and try to improve them. So this isn't about me showing you the best attack or even having an opinion about the best attack. It's about a process that I use and that I teach my students to use about getting better. So I think every time I do the best that I can, and every time I'm as critical as I can be, and every time I'm willing to change. And over a long period, my techniques will get better, and my understanding will grow. I'm going to become a better martial artist. My tenacity and my discipline will also grow. That's what I'm talking about with this video. Thanks. So normally, when I am doing a practice like this, I will do from 500 to 1,000 techniques. And this morning, the morning of this recording, uh, not feeling all that great. Kind of stiff. I feel edgy. Got some stuff on my mind, and I got to clear all that stuff out of there uh, before I can really get down to business. So as I'm moving, I'm taking some breaths and I'm meditating. Things start to come together after a little while. I'm moving pretty well, but still feel stiff. In this particular set of strokes here, I'm focusing on an overhand initiation, and I'm thinking about how my hips are coming forward and how my connection to the ground is. Let's break this down a little bit. The stance that I'm using is thinking of a German stance. I've got my foot flat on the ground and my back is relatively straight and tailbone is rounded. The angle of my hip is pretty open and my shoulders are flat. My center of gravity is a little bit behind my ankle. Watch what happens as I initiate the attack. The very first thing that happens is my arms come out. So this is me partway through. My upper body is leaned forward a little bit more than it was, and my hands extend forward. That makes them open to an attack. At this point, my center of gravity is over my front leg. Let's watch the follow through. At the point of contact, my back is upright and my tailbone is slightly tucked. My shoulders are down. My arms are fully extended. My center of gravity is well forward of my standing leg, and my front leg isn't even touching the ground. Let's look at this from the front. One thing I'm really striving for is to have my back leg fully extended. So from the front, I have a very narrow stance. My front foot is actually aiming outward a bit, and this is happening by opening my hip joint, not my knee or my ankle, and my pelvis is forward. Notice the full extension of my back leg. This was filmed a week after the first shots were made, and I had spent the time thinking about how to make my attack better. This time I'm using a Fiore-like stance. I'm quite happy with this one. I'm also extending my sword sooner. Let's analyze this one as well. My initial position is much further forward than before. My back is straight and upright and tailbone tucked. I'm quite open at the hip area. My shoulders are down. And as I said earlier, my weight is well forward. My initiation occurs with my sword leading. This is what I want. My back is straight, although I'm leaning forward a little bit more, and I'm opening up my hip joint. Shoulders are still down. My body is moving at my center forward as my sword completes its stroke. At the point of contact, my back is still straight. I'm well forward of my standing leg. Shoulders are down, arms are completely extended. And in the follow through, as before, my back is still straight. My front foot's off the ground, and I'm much more fully extended on my back leg. When I'm done with this attack, I drop down onto my front foot with very little forward momentum. There is some, though, because I'm leaning forward a little bit more. Here we go again. There's a slight triangling as I land. I think to compensate the swing of the sword. It's something to think about. So what's the point of this kind of an attack? I'm not really using this motion as a defensive move. It's definitely an offensive move. And I'm moving from kind of a further range to make the attack. It's not a close fight at all. So the idea is that we want to be able to get in. It's an entering move. We want to move into the guy with an ending, with a finishing attack, really. So I like to think of having an impeccable attack. And something that I would strive for. So an impeccable attack is an attack where my opponent knows I'm coming. They know what I'm coming with. They know what I'm going to try to do. And despite all that, I can still get in. So to do that kind of an attack, I have to really know what I'm doing. I have to be on the top of my game. Why practice for anything less? So when I'm trying to make this sort of a charge, this entering move, then what I want is to have that impeccable attack so that I can defeat the opponent with this one move. I might not, but then other things happen. So right now, in my study of this passing attack, my intention is to remove all of the things that get in the way of an attack that can defeat the opponent with one strike. Here's a summary of the things that you have to look at and work on in trying to perfect the passing attack. First and foremost, you need to have your front leg connected to the ground initially, as opposed to having double weight or weight on your back leg. Your front leg is going to transition into your back leg, and it's the standing leg. It's the connecting leg for this whole attack. A good way to identify whether your hips are far enough forward is to look at the front of your hip and to make sure that it is at least over your ankle. The shoulders have to be down The lats have to be firm and the tailbone is tucked under. Viewed from the front, the stance is very narrow with the back heel directly behind the front heel. This is the line of your attack. The entire front leg is canted outward slightly from the hip joint. The difference between a German front stance and a Fiore style of a front stance is the positioning of the back foot. When you assume this sort of a stance, it subtly changes the shape of your hip, making it a little bit more front facing, even though the front hip is forward. The inner thigh muscles initially pull the legs forward. The core and the lats stabilize and connect the arms to the legs, and the shoulders are relaxed. In the second half of the attack, the glutes and the quads fire to drive the charge forward. The core is still firm, the shoulders are still relaxed, and the tibialis functions to keep the heel on the ground while the leg extends. There's a transition from these initial muscle groups to the latter muscle groups. You have to drop off any muscle tension that isn't helping you to move forward. I thought it might be useful to analyze some students' passing attacks in light of the stuff that I've been talking about. I really appreciate my students' willingness to share some of their errors with you. Most of us are always making errors, and the way to learn martial arts is to see yourself clearly and to be willing to be critical of the things that you're doing without being self-deprecating. So it's just seeing yourself honestly. So I try to do this, and I want my students to do this too. It's an attitude that will allow you to surpass people who are initially more gifted if they're not doing it. So I want to thank Mike and Josh and Ashley for being willing to share their efforts at trying to understand this attack. First up is Mike Larner. Let's just watch Mike through his ready stance, his initiation, and then follow through to contact, and finally his follow through to recovery. Notice that Mike stumbles a bit forward at the end of his attack. Let's look at Mike and I side by side. To begin with, our ready positions are a little different. My stance is a little bit more upright, and my front hip angle is open, while Mike is crouching. His front hip is closed and his back leg is bent. His center of gravity is probably as forward as mine, but he's doing this by leaning his upper body more forward. His initiation is different as well. I begin with my sword and my tip is eventually going to be leading, and my center is going forward while Mike is extending his arms forward and his upper body is leaning forward. Here we are at the point of contact. At this point, we look pretty similar actually. I'm a little more upright and my sword is extending out further, and Mike's shoulders are raised a little bit. Our follow through is interesting. My back leg is extended and my back foot is flat on the ground. My front leg is off of the ground, whereas Mike's front foot is connected to the ground and his back foot is off the ground. This is important. This means that Mike is throwing his upper body forward and is not entirely in balance. And so he has to actually stop himself from moving forward with his front leg. And what this does is it makes him vulnerable to be thrown. If you fully extend on your back leg and do not connect to the ground with your front leg until after the technique, then what stops you is your connection to your back leg, not posting onto your front leg. This makes it a lot harder for you to be thrown and actually gives you more power in your attack. Let's watch Mike some more. That particular attack, he did not post onto his front leg very much, but this one he does. Arms come out, then he follows through. Let's have a look at Josh next. Josh's ready posture is more upright. His back is straighter and his hips are tucked in underneath. His shoulders are down, but his center of gravity is way behind his front leg. On initiation, he moves his hips forward and stays upright, but as he does so, his hands come out and the tip of his sword goes backwards. His attack is interesting. As he reaches out, both his knee and his elbow happen at the same time. This is actually slowing down his attack. At the point of contact, his back leg is still crouched, not extended. His foot is off the ground on impact, but very quickly he transfers his weight to his front leg to stop himself from moving forward. Here he is transferring his weight forward. In the end, he assumes a stance that's double weighted, and that's pretty much where he started from. He's going to have to overcome the double weightedness in order to attack quickly. Let's watch Josh a little bit more. Notice that there is a distinct telegraph in his motion because his hips are back. It's a 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. He has to draw himself forward before he can attack. Last but not least, let's have a look at Ashley. So Ashley's ready stance is an interesting one. Her back is upright, but her tailbone is out a little bit. Her front hip angle is open. And what's interesting is that her back hip is more forward. She's almost front facing. Her shoulders are down, and her center of gravity is behind her front foot. On initiation, her center of gravity comes rapidly forward. She does this by pushing that back hip forward even more. And her arms are extending out, leaving her sword tip trailing. On point of contact, her center of gravity is forward. She's crouched a little bit. Her shoulders are down, and her arms are extended. Her front arm is extended more than her rear arm. This means that her hips are parallel rather than your front hip forward. She's crouched a little bit. In the follow through, she's also posting her front leg, and she's still crouched. I've circled her front hip because it's not extended very far forward. Let's watch a little bit more of Ashley. See how she stops herself with her front leg. Arms come out, then the sword, then she posts onto her front leg. In conclusion, I have several other things that I need to mention. The first one is that if you decide to practice with this sort of intensity, you'll find that you're always honing your technique. Um, over over time, uh, you'll get complacent and you'll forget things. And when you return to a given technique, it might not be what you remembered it to be, or maybe you've learned some things in the meantime. But the idea of seeing yourself clearly allows you to keep moving forward, to keep developing or remembering or uh, building up uh, the best technique that you can have. Over time, what you realize, or the conclusion that I've come to, is that the the discipline of seeing yourself clearly, the practice of doing this, of sticking with something to this extent, is actually more important than the technique itself. Uh, it, it gives you a certain kind of tenacity that will serve you well in other respects, in all the different parts of your life. And then the second thought that I have as I end this instructional video is about how to make this actually work. So you practice and practice and you build an impeccable technique as good as you can make it. It's the best of your best. That doesn't mean it's without errors, but it's as good as you can make it in the moment. And it's pretty good, let's say. You still have to pay attention to your opponent, and you still have to find the right time and the place to do this. So what I like to call this is finding the voids. When you're watching an opponent uh, with the idea of attacking him with a really strong technique, then paying attention to when your opponent falls asleep or when they're unconscious, the moments when they just space out. And over time, you can learn to see when that is. And that's when you attack. If you look at somebody and they're completely aware of you, they're practicing the same way you are. And when you try to perform an impeccable technique, uh, they may catch you. But if you combine the rightness of the technique with the void in their consciousness, that's when the technique will work. Anyway, I hope that this video helps you and gives you some food for thought. Thanks.